Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome back to the third Random Thought Thursday in a row. I'm pretty sure this is going to be my last one, at least for a while. There's only so fertile the 55-year-old brain can be. As again, I'll preface what I'm about to say here by saying I'm not saying any of my thoughts are necessarily profound or original or even interesting. Watch at your own risk. So my random thoughts. My Random Thought Thursday this week was inspired by a book I read for Women in Translation Month, and that was The Years by Annie Ernaux, or Annie Ernaux. I'm not sure where you put the emphasis. So I read this book this week, and I found it to be really kind of fascinating. But part of the reason why I found it fascinating was, as you'll see in a minute, one of the quotes at the beginning of the book really kind of got me thinking about the subject of memory and meaning and life, etc., and I'll get onto that. But I want to talk about the book first because I think it's kind of important to understand what this book is and how different this book is, I think, from other memoirs. So what Ernaux is written here is kind of a collective memoir, or maybe it is a memoir that begins at the macro level and moves down to the micro level. It's a memoir of France. On one level, it's a memoir of France in the years after World War II. On another level, it's a memoir of the young generation of French people, of which Ernaux was a member, who were born during World War II, remember the war ending, and then kind of experience the massive kind of cultural, economic, social change that took place after that. It is, in that light, it is also a memoir of what I would think I can safely say are the ideas of young Marxists in France, of young feminists, of which Ernaux would certainly be one in France, and then a memoir of Ernaux herself. Even though she doesn't talk about herself in a way where you're certain that that's direct, I believe that that is what we have. So we have this kind of macro to micro, all of France down to Annie Ernaux kind of look at the years between 1945 and whenever this book was published or whenever she stopped writing this book in the 2000s. She's organized this, I think, in a really kind of clever way. And one of the great things about this book is it's kind of meta in that she kind of talks about how she conceived this book and how she figured out how to organize this book. But she organizes this book around photographs, I assume, of herself. If you're a reader of W.G. Sebald, you know not to necessarily trust that photographs are of the things they actually say they're of. But I assume she describes photos of herself at various points in her life, from baby all the way to the age that she is when the book was published. And there's this really kind of lovely photograph of her here at the end. And it's organized in that way, and she talks about France when she was that age, and society when she was that age, and all the things that changed when she was that age, and then herself at that age. Again, assuming it's herself. And I really think that the organization of the book is kind of brilliant, and it allows Ernaux to kind of focus on how all the massive changes that were taking place during this time period, changes in terms of consumerism and the growth of consumerism in France, changes brought about by technology, political changes, the end of imperialism in France, changes in sexual mores and ideas, changes in the role of women, changes in her own life, really are kind of the focus of this novel. And by using those pictures, she's able to kind of focus in on that. So I liked the book. This is one of those books where, I'm still kind of up in the air exactly what I think about it. I'm still kind of mentally chewing on the book. I will say that the writing, I think, is really interesting. And I'm going to assume that it's written this way intentionally. When Ernaux is essentially, I'm going to use the word reciting, when she is reciting events in France's post-World War II history, the writing is really stripped down and bare and no frills, so much so that it almost drones, that in reading it, you have a hard time not thinking to yourself, this doesn't seem that important, or didn't I already read this, or this isn't interesting. It almost feels that way, and then the more personal it gets, the more individual it gets, the more beautiful the writing becomes, the more beautiful images Ernaux creates, the more kind of poignant images and ideas she introduces. And I think that that's done on purpose. How successful I think that is one of those things that I'm still chewing on and still thinking about. But I think what Ernaux is trying to do here is trying to establish something about memory. And I think that what she's trying to establish about memory is, of course, kind of laid out in the two quotes she has at the beginning of the book. So the first quote says, "All we have is our history, and it does not belong to us." That's from Jorge Ortega y Gasset. And then a quote from Chekhov, "Yes, they'll forget us. Such is our fate. There is no help for it. What seems to us serious, significant, very important will one day be forgotten or will seem unimportant. And it's curious that we can't possibly tell what exactly will be considered great and important and what will seem petty and ridiculous. And it may be that our present life, which we accept so readily, will in time seem strange, inconvenient, stupid, not clean enough, perhaps even sinful." So when I read those quotes at the beginning of the book, my mind just immediately became immersed in this idea of what Ernaux's either trying to do in this book is trying to prove those quotes true, or she's trying to defy those quotes. She's either trying to prove that all these details of her life and France's life, won't matter. As I mentioned, some of them don't really have any resonance for me at all. Or she's trying to defy that idea that, we can't control memory and that we will be forgotten by writing this book. Now, that then triggered a whole lot of thoughts for me about memory. I am aging. Shocker, I know. I just turned 55 recently, and I find myself spending a lot more time thinking about about how the people I love and the people I know and members of my family, how they will go on when I'm dead. Not that they'll have a hard time going on, but Zelda, hush, please. Zelda. What will they remember about me? And I guess I know there's a certain amount of ego in that and hoping that they remember me. And then I'm wondering, what are they going to remember? Are they going to remember the good things? Will they remember the bad things? How have I lived my life? Am I live my life in a way which people remember good things about me instead of bad things about me? Those are kind of things that I'm thinking about, and I can't help that they are, narcissist. Well, I probably could have thought about it, but they are, in fact, narcissistic thoughts. But they are kind of thinking about this kind of post-me world, and that got me thinking about my father. My father has Alzheimer's disease. We have been incredibly lucky at this point that he was diagnosed many years ago, and he has been living a life essentially free from most of the major symptoms and problems caused by Alzheimer's disease. That is beginning to change, and I begin to think about that, or I think about that every time I talk to him on the phone. And I remember that a few years back, he essentially wrote a book for his grandchildren, where he wrote these stories from his own life, stories from his father's life, stories of his experiences as a young person, and he gave this book to them as a part of their Christmas gift one year. And it occurred to me that what my father is doing there is in some ways attempting to defy that quote from Chekhov, that they'll forget us, that what seems to us serious, significant, very important will one day will be forgotten or seem unimportant, that he's making a bid to kind of shape his grandkids' memory of him, what they remember, and the fact that they do remember him. And, as his son, and believing that he is a totally or almost completely admirable person, I hope they'll cherish those books and read them and remember him and remember the great things and the good things about him. I also thought about this because, in my own writing, I've been working on a military history that involves my great-uncle, who was a soldier, fought in the Pacific during World War II. And recently my cousin, he's my second cousin, put together a book which contains my uncle's writings, contains an interview from him conducted with him about World War II, and then his wife's memory of him. And it occurred to me that this is in a real way very similar to what my father had done, that my cousin wants his father to be remembered, and he wants these things that are very important to be the memory of his father, and to have those things out there. And so I was thinking, about that in connection to Ernaux's book as well. And then, really what we're talking about then here is an attempt to kind of achieve immortality, a kind of immortality, not the kind of immortality, where whatever your soul or whatever goes to heaven and lives on forever and ever, but a kind of immortality by fixing ourselves in memory. And I think this is just an innately human thing to do. From the ancient Egyptian pharaohs who had the pyramids built, this was an attempt by them to achieve immortality beyond just being vessels for transmitting their souls up to their own concepts of the afterlife. But the structures themselves, so colossal, are an attempt to forever fix their names in history and memory, and to live on long after their deaths. The reason why they had their names carved over everything, because I think they believed that having their name carved in stone would preserve memory of them for a long period of time. This is reflected still in burial practices here, at least in the Western world, in which people have tombstones inscribed with their name, inscribed with the dates in which they lived, names of their family members, sometimes some saying or quote. This again is an attempt to achieve some kind of immortality, by having your name carved in stone. And then it occurs to me then that essentially what writers like Ernaux is doing, one way or another, is attempting to achieve some kind, perhaps, of immortality by sticking in the memory of France or the world, or even if it's just your families. That really what these memoirs are, and we know memoirs are really popular in the book world today. By creating these things, they are attempting to achieve immortality. Now, this is the part where I may have talked about this in a video before. I'm an old man, I repeat stories. But, what I would say is that attempts like that to achieve immortality, or at least temporary immortality is a oxymoron, but I'm going to go with it, to at least achieve a temporary immortality, the thing about that is that it works. That we know the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, is the Pyramid of Cheops. His name lives on. We know 5,000 years later. Sure, it's not a whole lot about it, but we know, we're curious about who this person was that had the pyramid built and how that worked. It works. When you walk through a graveyard and you read the names, intentionally or unintentionally, on gravestones, you are essentially, accepting or creating or recreating the idea of that person simply by reading their name, simply by acknowledging that their name is on that stone. They have achieved, and saying it in your head, that person has achieved some kind of immortality. And writers achieve the same thing. And they do that by transferring the energy from their thoughts into the written word. This is where it gets kind of goofy, and you may think, oh, this is some kind of New Age crap. I'm not sure what it is, and again, I'm not saying this is original. But when a writer writes something down, their brain is working, right? They're having thoughts. We know those thoughts are electromagnetic, electrochemical, right? So they're literally energy. That thinking is energy, and they're transferring the energy of their thoughts down onto the page in the form of words. And those words act as a storehouse of their memories, and therefore those words act as a storehouse of the person's ideas, and therefore those ideas are a way in which that person remains immortal. We think about, in July, we finished Jane Austen July, and lots of people, me included, read about Jane Austen. Well, when you read Pride and Prejudice, you're not just, living, perhaps if you really get involved in the world that Jane Austen creates, you are living in Jane Austen's mind. And Jane Austen's thoughts become your thoughts. And therefore, she has achieved a kind of immortality. This is true whether we're talking about Jane Austen. It's true whether we're talking about Charles Darwin and his Origin of the Species. It's true whether we're talking about Isaac Newton or whoever we're talking about. Edgar Rice Burroughs. It doesn't matter. They've achieved a kind of immortality because you are thinking their thoughts. When you read the words on the page, that causes your brain that causes you to think. That creates electromagnetic thoughts and energy in your brain, which literally has been generated by reading the words of people who wrote it down and whose ideas were also electromagnetic energy, literally transferred from one person to another over infinite spans of time. And to me, that's a kind of immortality. And to me, that's kind of what Annie Ernaux is trying to create here, what my cousin is trying to create for his father, in this book and what my father was trying to create for himself by preserving his memory and his thoughts and his ideas in that book that he wrote for his grandchildren, that when they read that book, they will be thinking his thoughts, that the energy that he took and used to put on the page and to make those words will be transferred into their minds. And that is a form of immortality. Anyway, there you go. I think that's it. Not sure, again, that made any sense. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.